Good morning everybody, welcome to Sunday's edition of IndyCar. On today's programme I'm going to look at two items which directly relate to Scotland. The first one is to do with the appointment of the Scottish Secretary, or the Secretary of State for Scotland as he used to be known, and how the role of Scottish Secretary has changed from what it originally was intended to be back in the 1880s to what it is now. And also I want to look at the rumours, and they are rumours at the moment, and press briefings that Boris Johnson plans to delay going to the country with the general election until after Brexit. There are also rumours circulating around Westminster and in the media at the moment that Johnson is planning to use the billions of pounds of taxpayers' money which have been set aside to mitigate the worst effects of a no deal in order to fund his own election campaign. Now, this is just rumour at the moment. I'm emphasising these are unconfirmed rumours, but they're certainly worth talking about. Well, let's take the issue of the Secretary of State, the job that the Secretary of State for Scotland is supposed to do. Back in the 1880s, Westminster decided that in order for Scotland to at least have the appearance of being listened to in Westminster as part of the so-called Precious Union, that they would create a permanent position for a Scottish politician in the cabinet, and that position was known as the Secretary of State for Scotland. And that meant officially that there would always be a Scottish MP in government, there to represent supposedly the interests of the Scottish people at Westminster. Now, since 20 years now, since devolution was agreed to and implemented, the role of the Secretary of State for Scotland has changed, and it's not changed in a way which was ever discussed with us, nor was it ever agreed with the Scottish people that this role would change. But what's happened is, and we've seen it ourselves in fact, and all around us with everything that Secretaries of State for Scotland now do, that the role is no longer to represent Scottish people at Westminster in the cabinet there, but to represent the Westminster cabinet and the Union in Scotland, and to promote the Union in Scotland. So the Secretary of State's job is a complete reversal now of what it used to be. Now, Paul Kavanagh, who writes as Wee Ginger Doug in The National yesterday, outlined all of this beautifully and eloquently as usual. And I would say that if you ever want to read accurate information, not only on the history of Scotland and England and the relationship, but also including Ireland's story in this, then I would read both Paul Kavanagh's column and probably Fintan O'Toole's column in the Irish Times. Both of these writers have excellent information and accurate, up-to-date historical facts which they put out in their articles in a way that allows people to understand why things are happening the way they are, what the history is, and why the animosity between the Celts and Westminster. So what has happened now is that the new Secretary of State for Scotland, now that Mr Mundell has been unceremoniously cast aside, the new Secretary of State is an arch-Brexiteer, a Tory landowner from the borders, allegedly a farmer, but never looks to me like he's ever got any dirt under his fingernails, and a man who is more English than Scottish, I think it's fair to say. His loyalties lie in Westminster. So we're looking at a man who's been posted in Scotland as a viceroy, as a gatekeeper for the Union to prevent Scotland obtaining independence. That's his role now. Now, speaking of roles, Dominic Cummings, you may not have heard of this man until recently. Dominic Cummings is the political strategist who is responsible for Boris Johnson's recent campaign to become the leader of the Tory party and also to become Prime Minister. And Dominic Cummings, as Johnson's basically his press secretary, I suppose you'd say, chief propagandist, is now briefing the British media this morning that Boris Johnson plans to wait until after the Brexit date to hold a general election. So what he plans, apparently, according to this briefing, and I'm emphasising this is unconfirmed at the moment, is that Johnson plans to announce that there will be a general election before Brexit, but for the general election to be held after Brexit has occurred. That way, there is no way that the British government, that the British Parliament in Westminster can do anything to stop a no-deal Brexit being implemented if that is the result of talks with the European Union. Now, there's been a lot of barnstorming and willy-waving going on in the press, and a lot of rhetoric being published, particularly by the Daily Mail, the Express and the Times, saying that Johnson's basically telling Barney that he has to come back with, what was it, he said, something about the ability to change the deal. In other words, he wants the backstop gone, and they're talking about removing the backstop, and Barney has to do this or suffer the consequences of a no-deal Brexit. Now, this is akin to rushing up to somebody and saying, if you don't do what I say, I'm going to shoot myself in the head and you'll suffer getting covered in my blood, because basically this is not really a threat. It's being characterised as Britain going in hard and negotiating and playing hardball, but really all that's happening is this is a bit of play acting. It's a bit of bluster, a bit of theatre. Barney has said repeatedly, and he said again yesterday, that he answers to the leaders of 27 other countries, and all of them have said to him that they haven't changed their minds and that the deal stays as it is and it's not going to be renegotiated. So all of this bluster is basically just theatrics. There's not going to be a negotiation, because despite what the British media might tell you and the way that the Conservatives present this is never going to be a negotiation. It is a confrontation, because right from the beginning, when Brexit was first voted for and announced, it was always, I think, the intended destination that the British government would stall and delay and stall and delay as long as possible, and at the last moment they would announce that a no-deal Brexit was the only way. And this is exactly what's transpiring now. And as the countdown continues to the 31st of October, by the time Parliament reconvenes and Boris Johnson announces that there will be a general election, there might not even need to be a no-confidence vote. And it's looking likely, actually, that there might not even need to be a no-confidence vote, because I think Boris might actually go to the country voluntarily. And by announcing that there's going to be a general election after the deed is done is an absolutely incendiary thing to be saying right now, but it's characteristic of Boris's style. Question is, will he carry out this threat? There are other rumours floating around at the moment. Emerged yesterday that Boris Johnson might be planning to use the billions of pounds that have been earmarked for mitigating the effects of no-deal Brexit. I think it was about £6 billion earmarked for that. For Johnson to be dipping into those funds, to use public money to campaign for his own re-election and to strengthen his mandate for a no-deal Brexit in a general election. Now, this is, of course, illegal, because you're not allowed to use public funding. You're not allowed to use taxpayers' money to campaign for a general election. But it's widely believed, that wouldn't be accurate. It's thought that the Conservative Party is pretty much broke now, and they don't have a war chest to fight a general election with. And that is why this rumour is circulating, that this is now being touted as the way in which Boris is going to go about strengthening his hand. He's basically saying, I'm going to give you a general election to decide about Brexit after Brexit has happened. So he's basically looking for a rubber stamping exercise after the deed has been done. That's not the way democracy works. We don't have something done to you and then vote about whether you were happy about it or not. But that is what's being proposed here. Now, as well as that, we have complete radio silence from the SNP at the moment. Just little press releases here and there reiterating some old stories about Nicola Sturgeon wanting a new referendum on independence. But as far as I can see, and I'm reading between the lines here, the SNP is sticking to its game plan. And its game plan was always to wait until Brexit happened before pouncing, because in order to activate the mandate properly, so that it cannot be argued that Scotland has not fulfilled the terms of the mandate in their general election campaigns, they have to wait until Brexit actually happens before they start to move. The question is, will they be able to move fast enough to head off the power grab that is now inevitable with the new Secretary of State in position, with the new 3,000 civil servant jobs hub opened in Edinburgh, ready to operate, and with all of the talk from the civil service, well, not the civil service, but all the talk from the Scotland office being about going over the heads of the MSPs in Holyrood and directly funding and directly implementing policy through this new hub through the Scotland office. Now, none of this is conjecture. All of these things are being said by the Conservative Party, by the government already. These things will happen. The question is, when now is the SNP going to act? If Cummings is actually right, and if what he's saying is true about the general election happening after Brexit, this is a move to try and get the SNP to jump too soon, in my opinion anyway. And I don't think they'll react to this at all. This press briefing at the moment about Boris calling a general election, but calling it so that it happens after Brexit, could just be a ruse. There have been an awful lot of these provocations coming from London, designed to force pressure onto the SNP to move too soon, and I don't think they will do so. I think this is now a game of chicken. This is who blinks first, and to be honest with you, although the timing is going to be very, very tight on this, I don't think the SNP will blink first. I don't think they can blink first on this, and they're not going to. They've already managed to hold together month after month, despite constant provocations from London on the various nasty things that the Tories plan to do to Scotland. So we all have to hold our nerves at this moment and wait and see what actually happens when Parliament returns after the recess. But if this is what's going to be going on with Cummings briefing the press and leading people to conclude certain things before anything has even happened, then you can tell that there's going to be a lot of misinformation coming from number 10 Downing Street. But everybody who's in place in the new Tory government is there to ensure Brexit happens, and there's no mistaking the intent to Brexit. The question now is it really too late to stop no-deal Brexit, as Cummings is allegedly saying, or is there still time for it to be stopped? Personally, I don't think it will be stopped, because, believe it or not, a lot of the opponents of Brexit, in Scotland at least, don't want it to be stopped yet. They want it to happen because it is the trigger point for the mandate, and it's a very clear trigger point. In Ireland, they're preparing for a no-deal Brexit as well, and in Europe they're preparing for a no-deal Brexit. In fact, they're already prepared. So whatever Johnson does, and whatever he says to the Europeans are not going to blink, the SNP is not going to blink, and the Irish Republic is not going to blink. It's all a game of bluff at the moment. And frankly, I think the odds are stacked heavily against the Prime Minister, with 28 countries ranged against him, and I include Scotland and Ireland, both halves of it, in that 28. So that's the situation as it stands at the moment. I'll bring you some more news tomorrow when I get some more news, but for the moment that's it for today. But we keep holding, we keep waiting, and we keep, well, not being tempted. Don't be tempted to rush to judgment on the SNP over this. At the moment, they don't need to do anything yet. The Tory government is about to make its move, and until they do, really nobody can do anything. Brexit has to happen before anything else can happen. If those of you who watch Doctor Who might be familiar with fixed points in time that never change, this is one of those critical fixed points in history that won't change. It will happen, and it has to happen for the logjam to unjam and for the rest of history to start to run its course. But this is a nexus of a whole series of, shall we say, opposite forces meeting at one point Scottish independence, Irish reunification, English nationalism wanting to leave the European Union, the Europeans getting fed up with English nationalism and actually wanting rid of them whilst welcoming back the Celtic nations, Wales waking up as well. So a convergence of all of these forces which when they meet will drive England out of the group, because that's the only possible outcome that Brexit can do. That's what it will do, because England is actually going to be the underdog for a change, and that is a new position, I think, for them. And it'll be interesting to see what happens after Brexit, when the dust settles and the new lonely England on its own emerges. I'll see you later. Bye bye for now.